What China is doing is a complete shock to the United States. And what am I referring to? I am referring to reports from US intelligence themselves, of course, to the Western mainstream media, indicating that China has defeated the US's spy network. Now, you all may remember in October 2021, William Burns, the CIA director under the Biden administration, had announced that it was going to shift its focus away from endeavors in the Middle East and other parts of the world and focus on China or reopen mission centers and the like in order to rebuild its failed capacity. Well, 2 years later, and the United States is still talking about its inability to spy on China. And this is driving the neocons absolutely mad. So here's the Wall Street Journal. This is one of their biggest stories of the year of 2023. And it's to end the year. It says American spies confront a new formidable China. The CIA's lost network of agents a decade ago and has struggled to build or rebuild in the surveillance state America calls its top priority. No real insight into leadership plans. So the CIA lost network of agents a decade ago and has struggled to, wow, this is bad grammar, to rebuild in the surveillance state America calls its top security priority. No real insight into leadership plans. So Washington, Beijing's spy catchers all but blinded the U.S. and China a decade ago when they systematically rounded up a network of Chinese agents working for the CIA. As many as 24 assets providing information to the U.S. were executed or imprisoned, among them high-ranking Chinese officials. The CIA is still struggling to rebuild its human espionage capabilities in China, the agency's top intelligence target, according to interviews with current and former U.S. officials. The gaps leave the U.S. with limited understanding of secret deliberations among Chinese leader Xi Jinping and his inner circle on key security issues such as Taiwan and other topics. We have no real insight into leadership plans and intentions in China at all, said a former senior intelligence official who had recently read classified reporting. Strengthening the human spy network targeted on China is one goal of a titanic but mostly secret shift at the CIA and its sister U.S. spy agencies. It comes as a larger transformation in U.S. security policy away from fighting insurgencies around the world and toward preparing for a possible great power conflict with China and Russia. There you have it, admitting wholeheartedly that they are preparing for a conflict with Russia and China now and are moving away from insurgencies. What does that mean? Moving away from the Middle East, from terrorism, the war on terrorism. It's no longer about intelligence for the purposes of fighting so-called terrorism, which really was arming, backing terrorism in order to overthrow governments the U.S. didn't like in West Asia. So after 2 decades of supposedly hunting terrorists, $100 billion a year intelligence community is retraining personnel, redirecting billions in budgets, and retooling expensive spy machinery to focus on those potential adversaries. The pivot has not been simple. Hamas's surprise October 7th attack on Israel and the ensuing war in Gaza and the Russian invasion of Ukraine have demanded White House attention and intelligence resources, complicating CIA Director William Burns' drive to ensure China is the long-term top priority. One agency veteran said that handling the two crises while keeping a sustained focus on Beijing will test the agency's agility. And there you see Mr. William Burns not looking too happy about the way things are going. The U.S., which ceded responsibility for monitoring Palestinian militants in Israel in the years following the September 2001 terrorist attacks, and like Israel was blindsided by Hamas's assault, has redirected some intelligence resources to the Palestinian conflict in recent weeks, officials said. It isn't publicly known how substantial they are. The unexpected clash shows how difficult it can be with finite spying resources to get the balance right. The reality is that you don't have collection resources that you can exploit all over the world, said one counterterrorism official. China, which the Biden administration has named the greatest danger to American security, remains at the top of the CIA's to-do list, said Burns to the Wall Street Journal. We are approaching the People's Republic of China as a global priority, more than doubling the budget of resources devoted to China's mission over the past 3 years, and establishing the China Mission Center as the CIA's only single-country mission center to coordinate the full agency's efforts on this issue. Even as we are balancing multiple priorities, including ongoing conflicts, we remain intensely engaged in the strategic long-term challenge posed by the PRC, by China. So what the CIA is saying is, we're not doing too good at this. the Wall Street Journal has blown the lid off of something that has been known and has been talked about in prior Western mainstream media reports, but it's coming out now with interesting timing because I think what's happening is the United States' intelligence apparatus and its military strategic policymakers, those who basically make war, they are concerned that there is not sufficient focus on China at the moment when the U.S. is bogged down in West Asia and Ukraine because of Gaza and because of the failed Ukraine project. This is becoming quite evident that they are becoming bogged down and cannot effectively focus on China. And so, in a previously undisclosed mission, Burns traveled to Japan and South Korea during the Hamas attacks, said a CIA official following a publicly reported trip to Beijing in May. Even as the Middle East and Afghanistan dominated resources and attentions in the years of 9/11, U.S. intelligence agencies never stopped targeting China aggressively, according to former officials directly involved in those efforts. This intelligence focus intensified in the mid 2000s, they said, but the entire U.S. government didn't make China a priority for at least another decade. So, this is what's interesting, is while they're admitting that they have failed dramatically on the question of spying on China and being able to undermine China, not only have they failed dramatically, but they refuse to acknowledge how China was able to uncover their spy network and essentially end the US's capacity to spy on China. That to me is the story that is the most interesting and probably the most shocking part of what's going on here is not the US focusing on China, which this article has and this report has focused on in great detail, but it is the fact that China has completely blown the lid off of the invincibility that the United States' intelligence apparatus likes to project around the world. They like to project the image that they can just do whatever they want, whenever they want, right? When Elon Musk said we can coup whoever we want, he was talking about, of course, in reference to lithium in Bolivia, but really what he was talking about was a longstanding trend of the CIA and U.S. intelligence being very deeply involved in covert efforts to conduct regime change and to destabilize countries and regions of the world that were very valuable to corporate interests like those that Musk represents. So they haven't been able to do that to China in a very long time. There has been no capacity to undermine China's political leadership. Today, U.S. spy satellites closely monitor China's military deployments and modernization plans, while cyber and eavesdropping tools scoop up vast swaths of Chinese communications. Beyond that, U.S. knowledge of Xi's plans comes mostly from interference and from parsing his frequent public statements. So, not interference. Beyond that, U.S. knowledge of Xi's plans comes mostly from inference and from parsing public statements. What does that mean? It means they have no inner access to Xi Jinping. There's no one around the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, no one in the Politburo, no one helping the United States. There's no one even directly underneath those folks in the Communist Party of China that are working at the behest or even working as double agents, what have you, for the United States. Basically, what that means is that the United States can do nothing but read public statements like you and me do when we are trying to find out what Xi Jinping has said and what he is talking about, what he is planning to do as the Chinese president. We are doing the same thing that CIA analysts are doing right now in Biden's administration. That is how weak the United States has become. China is a much tougher intelligence target than it was a decade ago when agents were lost. Xi's security first state employs Orwellian surveillance systems that vastly complicate spy operations inside the country. And U.S. intelligence must track China's progress in fields as disparate as in artificial intelligence and synthetic biology. The two countries have clashed over American technology restrictions, military maneuvers at sea and in the skies, and of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. China's weaknesses, notably slowing economic growth and a shrinking population, are another wild card in assessing its future course. So this is what they always do. They basically say, we have no capacity. We're reading statements from Xi Jinping. China destroyed our network. But guess what? China is also collapsing. So maybe there's some hope here. No. China has put the lid on any of that. All of this is complete and utter horse, you know what. It is garbage. What the US intelligence apparatus is trying to feed us is false hope for an aim that we should have no attachment or hope over. None of us should care that about the US intelligence's aims around China or the Pentagon largely and the Defense Department and the US military apparatus at large. We shouldn't care about what they do or what they think about China because we know that their aims are nefarious. They are trying to destroy really what is at the moment the world's best hope for prosperity. That is China. The world's best hope to prosper because China has the tools, it has the growth, it has the development, it has the manufacturing base, and it has an economic model and a diplomatic model that allows for the majority of the world to take advantage and to cooperate and collaborate. Unfortunately, China's goals and objectives are so vast that it's really difficult to say that we're doing a great job, says House Intelligence Committee Chairman Mike Turner said in an interview. In the early 2000s, CIA analysts began warning frequently about China's economic growth and military ambitions. Former U.S. officials said, collectively, this stream of classified intelligence reports became known among government insiders as the Scary China Brief. So, Scary China Brief. This is how serious these folks are. Secret reports sent to the White House, State Department, and other agencies charted the planned modernization of the People's Liberation Army, China's coming naval expansion, and Beijing's goal for overseas bases. The CIA leveraged endemic corruption in the upper reaches of the Communist Party and government ministries to recruit dozens of officials as paid agents, former officials familiar with the event said. But in a catastrophic setback, this network was obliterated as China caught the traitors in the midst one by one. A flaw in the CIA's covert communications with its agents exploited by Beijing is a suspected cause of the compromise. The details of what went wrong aren't publicly known, and it is unclear if anyone at the agency was held accountable. Horrendous, 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 a former U.S. official said of the losses in China, and I have doubts about whether there's been much recovery since then. The agent roll-up had profound effects. It occurred just as Xi was being groomed for power. Shock at the depth of the CIA penetration helped shape the Chinese leaders' overarching emphasis on security and loyalty, said another U.S. intelligence official. It also, at least for a time, chilled the agency's efforts to recruit foreigners worldwide. The feeling was, why would I take a call from the U.S. from a U.S. person? I know that Chinese people got bullets in the back of their head. The U.S. lost its human network in China just as Xi became Communist Party leader in late 2012 and then president a few months later. Multiple, sometimes daily CIA reports predicted he would be a different kind of Chinese leader, more forceful, nationalistic, and security-focused, current and former intelligence officials said. Several officials said the analysis was largely ignored by President Barack Obama's White House, which hoped that China grew economically, it would liberalize and join the U.S.-led international order. This is false. That policy had been followed by Democratic Republican administration for 2 decades. There was a lot of desperation to believe that, said a former CIA analyst of East Asia. So this was a disaster, okay? And we don't have to, this is a long story. We don't have to go over the whole thing because it's a long story of what happened. But we know that the primary message here, okay, and I'm going to show you. So the primary message here is that the CIA is trying to confront a new formidable China and has not been able to recover what they lost in 2012. Now, when former U.S. officials, U.S. intelligence say that this loss emboldened China and Xi Jinping to talk a certain way and to lead a certain way, well, of course it does. How would you feel if you were being spied on and you were being undermined? And what is the CIA's goal? Is it to help China? No, it is to destabilize China. It is to make China weaker. So if you catch the CIA in the act, you destroy its ability to spy, well, of course, you're going to focus on security. Of course, you're going to focus on sovereignty. And of course, you're going to build the tools and employ the tools to make sure that this doesn't happen again. That is not out of the ordinary. That is not some scary China story, as the CIA had put it in their so-called classified documents of their conversations about China over the years following the end of the Soviet Union. That is simply just basics, okay? And so the New York Times also reported on this too, and I'm just going to show you. This is they released this story around the same time to end 2023. Chinese spy agency rising to the challenge of the CIA. The ambitious Ministry of State Security is deploying AI and other advanced technology to go toe to toe with the United States, even as the two nations try to pilfer secrets. And this article talks about how China's ability to use advanced technologies is at the heart of how they're able to defend themselves from U.S. subversion. And that is what is so shocking about all of this, is that one of the biggest reasons why China is able to do this is not just the fact that it has a pretty disciplined, powerful, and popular political party leading the way and keeping the best interests of China in mind, and it is disciplined to do that. It's not only because of the Communist Party of China's fierce discipline in this way, but it's also because China has completely and utterly destroyed U.S. attempts to undermine its economy, especially the high-tech sector. So if you can deploy high-tech, advanced artificial intelligence, robotics, etc., all of the latest telecommunications, and you can move ahead of the United States. The Australian Strategic Policy Institute has already said that China leads in 37 of the 44, leads the United States in 37 of the 44 high technology sectors in the world. If China has that advantage, then China has the ability to deploy those in ways the United States cannot even fathom, because it doesn't have access to them, not even the most powerful sectors of its national security state, like the intelligence apparatus. So, in effect, what we are talking about is a total obliteration of U.S. plans to undermine China, because if the U.S. doesn't have intelligence to undermine China, then the U.S. really doesn't have much at all. Because, and here's Bloomberg. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. Bloomberg talked about recently, to end the year, how Huawei sales were near 100 billion to end 2023. Surprise breakthrough, they say. The Chinese national champion sales bounced back this year. Huawei made its mark with chip advances in turbulent 2023. So I'm just going to read a bit of this to show how the advances in 2023 for China were so critical in the realm of the economy, that it has assisted its ability to defend itself from being undermined by the United States covertly and overtly. And I'm going to show you why later. So Huawei Technology company's revenue surged 9% in 2023, capping a dramatic year for a Chinese technology powerhouse that challenged Apple Inc. and U.S. sanctions with a surprise breakthrough in chip technology. Sales jumped by more than 700 billion yuan, or 98.7 billion US dollars, their fastest pace of growth in years, thanks to a resurgent smartphone business and robust 5G equipment sales. On a quarterly basis, revenue climbed 27% to at least 243 billion yuan, based on Bloomberg's calculations off the annual figure. That's a sharp acceleration from the third quarter's slight rise. Huawei made a splash in 2023 after releasing a smartphone with a sophisticated made-in-China 7-nanometer Kirin processor, celebrated across the country over U.S. restrictions intended to hobble the country's tech industry. The revelation ignited debate in Washington over whether those curbs had failed and what more needed to be done. Huawei, written off as a smartphone player after the U.S. cut it off from overseas suppliers in 2019, is mounting a comeback. The Shenzhen-based conglomerate has emerged as a symbol of China's resolve to thwart its geopolitical rivals' curbs, but Huawei itself warned of the dangers Washington and a volatile global economy will pose. So all Ken Hu, who's one of the executives who rotate in the chairman's role, says that there's changes in the business environment not caused by geopolitical conflict, but economic cycles which need to be watched out for. But nonetheless, those are impressive gains. Huawei has enjoyed strong support domestically since its 2019 blacklisting. State-owned telecom carriers awarded Huawei lucrative deals in 5G into cloud computing, and other institutions bought from the company. The Huawei Mate 60 Pro, the gadget housing the 7-nanometer Kirin chip, has taken market share away from Apple's iPhone 15 since its August launch, and Huawei has morphed into a major player in semiconductors, the very sector the Biden administration is focused on curtailing. Traditionally, Huawei has been a leader in networking equipment and smartphones, but it's establishing a network of chip plants and receiving $30 billion of funding from the government and its hometown of Shenzhen, according to the Semiconductor Industry Association. Into 2024, Huawei may have to contend with not just a persistent U.S. campaign to contain China, but also pressure to keep up its technological advances. Oh, boo-hoo for Huawei. I mean, Huawei's in the driver's seat, and now it has to worry about keeping up with expectations that have already been met as quite high. The last will come more difficult as already scarce critical components for chip making, such as equipment, become further strained. Gina Raimondo, Secretary of Commerce of the U.S., has said that she will try to take the strongest possible action to protect its national security when asked how she will respond to Huawei's breakthrough. To ensure its technological lead, Huawei aims to expand investment in emerging technologies such as AI. We need to proactively embrace the window of opportunity and invest our limited resources in the most critical strategic domains. Overall, our strategy direction is clear. We will continue to streamline headquarters, simplify management, and ensure consistent policy while making adjustments when needed. So this is a story that tells you all you need to know about where China is at right now and why the United States' national security apparatus is having such a hard time. And it all boils down to the fact that the Communist Party of China and the Chinese government that it leads is investing heavily in ensuring that companies like Huawei are successful. So when you have a government that is interested in investment, you can actually do some pretty big things. And that is what China is showing the world. And so with the development of the Huawei Mate 60 Pro, for example, what China is saying is we have the tools to circumvent the very infrastructure the United States has built to spy and wage war against us. So while 2023 was indeed a year where Russia defeated U.S. sanctions, we can also say that 2023 was the year that China cemented its economic prowess to the point where it cannot be touched by the United States militarily. And what do I mean by this? Well, over the course of the years, we have had, especially since the pivot to Asia under Obama, the acceleration under Trump of a Cold War policy, and of course, the Biden administration's counterproductive acceleration and escalation of war of a conflict on China. We've had many different rounds of the United States playing at war and seeing whether it would be successful, with very mixed reviews from some of the most bloodthirsty and warmongering think tanks that exist in the United States. So what do I mean by this? So in 2016, the Rand Corporation probably had the most glowing assessment in 2016 about thinking through the unthinkable war with China. So of course, the Rand Corporation is directly related and connected and funded by the Defense Department. So here is what they had for key findings about what would happen if a war were to break out. And this is very glowing somewhat for the United States. Both sides would suffer losses. U.S. losses in 2015 would be a small fraction of forces committed, but still significant. Chinese losses would be much heavier, and U.S. losses in a substantial fraction of forces committed. So they would be much heavier for China in 2015 if it were to happen in 2015 capabilities. But when Chinese capabilities improve by 2025, U.S. losses would range from significant to heavy, and Chinese losses, while heavy, could be somewhat less owing to increased degradation of U.S. strike capabilities. So Chinese capabilities will make it increasingly difficult for the United States to gain military. So this is a glowing report, but even they will say at the Rand Corporation, they will have difficulty, the United States, in gaining military operational dominance and victory, even in a long war. So although war would harm both economies, damage to China's would be far worse, supposedly. This is 2016. Because much of the Western Pacific will become a war zone, China's trade in the region would decline substantially, supposedly. China's loss of seaborne energy supplies would be especially damaging. A long conflict could expose China to internal political divisions, speculation, and Japan's increased military activity in the region could have considerable influence on military operations. So this is the glowing report, and even they are saying at the Rand Corporation in 2016 that it would be quite a problematic venture. But now we can go to the coverage of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a State Department, U.S. government funded think tank, reported in the Air Forces magazine, Air and Space Forces magazine, about a simulation conducted in 2023. So this simulation offered a rare look at U.S.-China clash over Taiwan in the world of war gaming. So actually, this was a lot less glowing now that we're talking about 2023. The U.S. could take thousands of casualties, but in most cases would ultimately prevail. These were the conclusions drawn from a series of 24 war games run by the CSIS that assessed a scenario in which China attempted an amphibious invasion of Taiwan in 2026. So we're going to go to the results, okay? Because I don't want to read this whole thing. The 24 game iterations presented sobering findings. High attrition of forces on both sides, massive U.S. surface ship and aircraft losses, and quick exhaustion of long-range precision-guided munitions. Attack on U.S. forces based in Japan could quickly draw the Japanese into the conflict. In most scenarios, the U.S., Taiwan, Japan alliance defeated a conventional amphibious invasion by China and maintained an autonomous Taiwan. However, this defense came at a high cost. The United States and its allies lost dozens of ships, hundreds of aircrafts, and thousands of its service members. Taiwan saw its economy devastated. Further, the high losses damaged the U.S.'s global position for many years. So that's the rub here, is that if you want to go to war with China, you are essentially saying, okay, you're trading in short-term, what really is major losses, but short-term victory, as it is seen or perceived here, for long-term defeat. That is what even the CSIS is saying here. So, all in all, this is all about preparing the United States for war with China. But even these war simulations conducted by very enthusiastic and optimistic observers and analysts at these major think tanks are saying the losses are going to be huge. And if we learned anything from Russia, from the Ukraine conflict, we learned anything at all, it is that the United States chronically underestimates those it calls its adversary. It cannot stop underestimating those they view as weaker than them. This is the American exceptionalist mindset, the hubris, the out and out, dare I say, racism, the arrogance, the belief that the people that you are targeting are not human beings and therefore have no chance against you. But last time I checked, China has destroyed the U.S.'s capabilities to spy on it. The U.S. intelligence is reading public statements from Xi Jinping in order to find out information about Xi Jinping. If that doesn't show you the U.S.'s ultimately weak position, I don't know what does. But then you look at the question of Taiwan and the CSIS war games. How does the United States stop China from blockading and surrounding Taiwan to the point where the economy is starved and the global economy is in shambles, and the United States cannot withstand that? China, though, has withstood many economic crises because it has a resilient economy and it is able to pour in state investment when it is needed to protect its industries. That's what it did during COVID. That's what it did during 2008. That's what it's doing now in the aftermath of this Ukraine conflict and the sanctions and the impact that it's had on the economy. China's economy surely is not growing as rapidly as it once did, but the collapse narrative has been proven false over and over again. And actually, China's economy is quite stable if its economic relations abroad are any indication, or the fact that China is having breakthroughs in innovation, in investments, in high technology, as the Bloomberg has reported. So who really is in the weak position now? When Nancy Pelosi in August of 2022 visited Taiwan, China uh, uh, went into high gear and surrounded the island. The same when Kevin McCarthy visited as well. High gear. Taiwan was surrounded. These military operations that China conducts in the region are no joke. And China has the largest navy in the world and has the highest technology in the world to deploy against the United States. To underestimate China is foolish to think when the United States lost to this guy, to Vietnam. It lost to Vietnam. You know what they were fighting with in Vietnam? They were fighting with old Soviet weapons. They were fighting with meager Chinese weapons. And in many cases, they were fighting with no major weapons at all that were built by the Vietnamese themselves. Essentially, they were fighting one of the poorest people in the world, and they got their butts kicked. Afghanistan, 2021. What happened? The United States got their butts kicked by one of the poorest people in the world. Now it's proxy Israel. Gaza is one of the most impoverished and destroyed, and it's just shameful what has been done to Gaza. But the Al-Qassam, the Palestinian resistance, they are kicking Israel's butts right now on the ground. Why? Because they have the initiative, they have the motivation, they have they have nothing to lose but their freedoms. China has nothing to lose but its sovereignty because it has already built what it needs to be self-reliant. And guess what? China is the most popular country in the world when it comes to economic cooperation and investment. China has deep relations with the vast majority of the world's nations and countries, including the United States. So to think that China doesn't have leverage in an impending conflict with the United States is to be utterly ignorant and just in complete denial of the realities that are facing the declining United States-led unipolar order. That will be the folly and the mistake of the empire when it is all said and done in the final analysis. And China's ability to wipe out the US's spy network should not only shock those who have just learned about this, but it should also be a sobering lesson into what happens when you mess around. You eventually find out. When you mess around, when you try to go beyond your means as an entity that never really had legitimacy at all to rule over the world based on your model of degradation, deprivation, and exploitation, that eventually that model, that system will reach its limits. And China is the biggest example of what happens when that system reaches its limits. Something else arises. A new world is born, and China is at the head of it. And China will not be losing any war with the United States if it is ever fought. In this day and age, it is seemingly unlikely that the United States could even begin towing that line at this moment, given that it can't even get out of much smaller and arguably militarily more insignificant quagmires like Gaza and even Ukraine, which is a massive military assault, a massive military campaign. But even that really does pale in comparison to what would happen if the United States were to spark a war in the Asia Pacific against China. So the United States is not prepared. It's not ready. It's all over. And China's successful defeat of the US's spy network is just one example of this. Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.